Over the years, many people have posted comments on my YouTube channel, expressing the commonly held belief that the higher the number of local dimming zones on a mini LED TV, the better its picture quality. So when you look at this table I've compiled of the 4 key mini LED TVs I've personally tested this year, you can see that the Sony X95L not only has less local dimming zones than competing models, but also the lowest native LCD panel contrast among this quartet. If you subscribe to the numbers-based review methodology popularized by data-driven website ratings, this may lead you to conclude that there's no way the Sony X95L will deliver good enough picture performance for a 2023 mini LED TV. Well, to find out, I have done side-by-side comparisons between the Sony X95L versus the Samsung QN95C, the Sony X95L versus the TCL C845, and the Sony X95L versus the Hisense U8K. For the sake of completeness, I've even compared the BRAVIA X95L versus the step-down Sony X90L FALD LED LCD, as well as against the LG G3 MLA OLED, all using a Sony BVM-HX310 mastering monitor as reference. Let's start with this very dark sequence from episode 7 in House of the Dragon, which is arguably the most challenging content for any consumer television to display accurately, owing to the episode's creator-intended dimness. As you can see for yourself, the Samsung QN95C would crush plenty of shadow detail to minimize blooming. The TCL C845 would look grey and washed out owing to ineffective local dimming, and the Hisense U8K was somewhere in between the Samsung and the TCL, yet still couldn't match the Sony X95L, which came closest to reproducing the creative intent if we use the HX310 reference monitor as benchmark. Next, let's check out this scene from the 4K Blu-ray of Arrival. Here's the Samsung QN95C versus the Sony X95L. Here's the TCL C845 versus the Sony X95L. And here's the Hisense U8K versus the Sony X95L. And again, the BRAVIA X95L produced the most accurate shadow detailing, the greatest image depth, and the inkiest letterbox bars despite having the fewest local dimming zones and the lowest native panel contrast, proving that local dimming algorithm is actually the most important factor that determines the picture quality of any FALD LED LCD TV. Of course, Sony's local dimming philosophy meant that the X95L would manifest more blooming artifacts, such as around the white subtitles in this campfire scene from the 4K Blu-ray of The Revenant. But just look at the advantages of Sony's approach. More shadow detail than the Samsung QN95C, greater image contrast than the TCL C845, and a less hazy appearance than the Hisense U8K, all while coming closest to matching the overall presentation on the Sony BVM-HX310 mastering monitor. While on the subject of this Revenant scene, I would like to point out that blooming suppression is the number one benefit conferred by the higher number of local dimming zones on the Sony X95L compared to the step-down X90L. In bright scenes, the BRAVIA X90L largely held its own against the X95L, even edging it on a few rare instances thanks to the X90L's slightly higher full-screen brightness. It's in dark scenes where the Sony X95L pulled ahead significantly of the X90L, with less blooming artifacts or light seepage into the top and bottom letterbox bars from adjacent bright objects, which is not at all surprising given that the 65-inch X95L is equipped with 480 local dimming zones, whereas the 65-inch X90L only has 80. More zones allow for tighter control, like the Kegel exercises I've started doing, for reasons. Moving on, let's compare some brighter HDR scenes against other non-Sony mini LED TVs. The Samsung QN95C tone map HDR10 content based on maximum mastering display luminance metadata, so occasionally the HDR presentation of conservatively graded titles in a 4000 nit container would come across darker than reference. Also, Samsung's obsession with curtailing blooming would reduce the HDR impact of small specular highlights and even cause faces to look dimmer than on the Sony HX310 mastering monitor. The TCL C845's PQEOTF tracking was dependent on the content APL, Therefore, many HDR scenes in CinemaScope movies would appear brighter than reference, prompting us to manually adjust the gamma setting to obtain a closer match to the Sony HX310. However, for non-CinemaScope HDR titles, we found that the new gamma value was too dark, requiring some backtracking to better reproduce the creator's intent. Unlike the Sony X95L, which consistently provided an impressive match to the BVM-HX310. The Hisense U8K fared better than the Samsung and the TCL in bright scene accuracy, but for some reason, there's a strange upward skew in the TV's PQ EOTF tracking at the brighter end, resulting in some bright highlight detail being overblown or even clipped. Talking about PQ EOTF tracking, our Sony X95L review unit seemed to measure darker than the ST2084 HDR10 standard. Visually though, if you increased the gamma setting from the default value of 0 to compensate on paper, the image on screen would become more washed out and lifted compared to the BVM-HX310. What this means is that Sony's always-on dynamic tone mapping will automatically do the correction, so there's no need for you to change the default gamma setting of 0 in HDR mode. The 65-inch Sony X95L uses a VA-type LCD panel with viewing angle compensation filter, which came into view after we adjusted our microscope slightly. While the implementation of such a filter could reduce off-axis gamma shift, unfortunately it would also cause some rainbow reflections when hit by light, as well as decrease the native contrast of the panel. After aligning peak white close to 120 candelas per square meter on a 4x4 ANSI checkerboard pattern, black level on our BRAVIA X65X95L review sample measured 0.05 candelas per square meter with local dimming disabled, amounting to a native contrast ratio of 2300:1. Using our own custom-authored test pattern containing a small white box crawling horizontally and vertically against a black background, we counted a total of 480 independently dimmable zones in a 24x20 arrangement, which is less than every other high-end mini-LED TV on the market size for size. However, as demonstrated earlier, Sony's local dimming algorithm was so good that the X95L actually delivered noticeably better contrast performance in low-light HDR scenes than even mini-LED TVs with higher native panel contrast and zone count, while maintaining picture accuracy that came closest to matching the presentation on the Sony HX310 mastering monitor. Out-of-the-box grayscale accuracy on our review unit was fairly good by consumer TV standards, but could definitely be improved by professional calibration, eventually leading to an average delta error of below 1 on this challenging color checker SG chart where 140 patches were measured, with only a couple of colors marginally exceeding the humanly perceptible threshold of delta error 3, translating to accurate and cinematic colors in real-world viewing. Screen uniformity on our 65-inch BRAVIA X95L review sample did not quite meet the high standards we've come to expect from Sony LED LCD TVs in recent years. There were some minor blotches on darker full-field gray slides, as well as color tinting around the borders of the screen on brighter backgrounds, although we seldom saw these non-homogeneity issues in real-world content, which contain more textures. By setting motion flow to custom, then increasing smoothness to 2 and clearness to 1, we managed to achieve a motion resolution of 1080 lines, surpassing the 600 lines we obtained on the step-down Sony X90L on the same settings. Please bear in mind that because Sony still doesn't separate its motion flow settings into low frame rate and high frame rate interpolation, using the smoothness control to reduce motion blur when watching sports would unfortunately also introduce soap opera effect or SOE and interpolation artifacts to 24p movies, which may frustrate critical viewers. DCI-P3 color gamut coverage came in at 97% in UV terms, whereas Rec 2020 coverage was 81%, with the underlying spectral power distribution showing beautifully distinct red, green, and blue peaks typical of quantum dot technology. During playback of the 4K Blu-ray of Pan, which was graded up to 4000 nits, we spotted some strange contouring within very bright elements, which went away once we switched to graphics or game mode, suggesting that it's caused by Sony's dynamic tone mapping. To be fair, we didn't see this anomaly in every other HDR title we watched during our review period, but do let us know in the YouTube comment section below if you witnessed something similar on your X95L. The TV supports Vanilla HDR10, HLG or Hybrid Lock Gamma, for example from the internal BBC iPlayer app, as well as Dolby Vision formats. However, we found that even the most accurate Dolby Vision dark picture preset would crush some shadow detail, visible not only on the PQETF tracking chart, but also in real-world Dolby Vision movies, such as in this dark sequence from The Matrix. We actually preferred watching 4K Blu-rays in HDR10 on the Sony X95L, given how well judged the TV's dynamic tone mapping algorithm was in reproducing the creative intent. Furthermore, if you are using the same HDMI source to play 4K 120Hz games and watch Dolby Vision content, for instance through an AV receiver, you would have to manually go into the HDMI signal format submenu and switch to enhanced format Dolby Vision before you can watch 4K Blu-rays in Dolby Vision format, which is a massive inconvenience. Like on all BRAVIA XR TVs, the adjust HDR settings on the PS5 would be auto-populated upon first handshake with the Sony X95L. But since the automated process would set maximum tone map luminance and maximum full-frame tone map luminance at 21 clicks from minimum, which corresponds to 2300 nits, as well as minimum tone map luminance at 1 click from bottom, which would raise the black floor, the resulting HDR presentation in HDRG compliant games will look more washed out with blown out highlights. We recommend manually setting the first and second adjust HDR screens on the PS5 at 17 clicks from the bottom, and adjusting the third screen all the way down to black as always, which should provide more image depth while retaining bright highlights in HDRG compliant games. Design-wise, the Sony X95L Mini LED TV is supported on a pair of metallic feet at both ends of the LED LCD panel, with the position and the non-glossy finish preventing reflections from polluting the picture on screen. The back portion of both feet is tilted inwards, preventing it from spoiling your front view. The default low-profile feet configuration gives a premium, minimalistic appearance, but you can also opt for a central stand position whose footprint is small enough to fit on a narrower piece of AV furniture, or a higher propped-up position to accommodate a soundbar or perhaps even a game console. The supplied remote control is the premium, streamlined version which automatically lights up when moved in the dark. Sound quality was above average by TV standards, delivering sufficient bass response, dialogue clarity and soundstage to satisfy casual viewing. Let's sum up. In case you haven't realized by now, I am super impressed with the Sony X95L's ability to faithfully reproduce the creative intent, even in some of the most challenging dark HDR scenes that would trip up every other non-Sony Mini LED TV on the market. Put another way, if I had to rewatch all my favorite 4K Blu-ray movies on any 2023 Mini LED TV, I would choose to watch them on the Sony BRAVIA X95L series. That's high praise. It has less local dimming zones, slightly inferior native panel contrast, and lower peak brightness than high-end Mini LED TVs from rival brands. But these on-paper deficiencies don't matter in the grand scheme of things, because Sony's local dimming algorithm is the magic ingredient that elevates the X95L above competing models to deliver a knockout image. And when you add the Japanese brand's class-leading native gradation, upscaling and motion handling to the picture, the Sony X95L is comfortably the best 2023 LED LCD TV on the market in terms of overall visual quality, and so it deservedly earns our highly recommended award. Naturally, some of you will ask me, Vincent, does this mean that the Sony X95L Mini LED TV can match OLEDs when it comes to picture performance then? Well, OLED still has the upper hand in pixel-level illumination control, resulting in no blooming artifacts whatsoever, especially around subtitles, which may be important to some of you. And in most HDR scenes with a mixture of semi-bright and dark elements, OLED will always deliver more image depth and dimensionality than mini LED TVs, however slightly, again due to OLED's precise light modulation. On the other hand, mini LED TVs can go brighter than OLEDs in very high APL HDR scenes and won't suffer from permanent burn-in or unwanted auto-dimming caused by static elements on screen. What I'm trying to say is, OLED and mini LED TV have their respective strengths and weaknesses for different use cases. But among mini LED TVs in 2023, the Sony X95L reigns supreme despite its somewhat lackluster gaming chops owing to higher input lag in VRR mode, only 2 HDMI 2.1 ports, and no HDIG support. Now, regardless of whether you choose to buy an OLED or mini LED TV, UK electrical retailer Crampton Mall, who have kindly sponsored this video, are offering their in-store calibration service at only £99 for a limited time if you buy selected 2023 OLED or mini LED TV models from them. I have personally trained their calibrator David Corner to my own high standards. He will run in the television, calibrate it, and deliver it to you after having the calibration approved by me. We've been doing this for more than 2 years, and customer feedback has been excellent. So please give Crampton Mall a call if you wish to buy a calibrated TV, or even any new TV at a competitive price with top-notch customer service. Thanks again for your support. Okay, you may have noticed that in this video, I haven't gone into detail about several attributes on the Sony X95L, such as motion handling of 24Hz and 50Hz content, upscaling of standard definition and high definition video, film mode interlacing for 3.2 and 2.2 cadences, native 10-bit gradation plus the TV's smooth gradation decontouring filter for heavily compressed material, input lag for 60 frames per second and 120 frames per second video signal including with VRR engaged, Dolby Vision gaming compatibility on the Xbox Series X, not to mention 444 chroma reproduction for PC use. This is because the results I obtained in these areas are the same as those observed on the BRAVIA X90L, which uses the exact same MediaTek MT5895 chipset. So if you want to get more in-depth details about these technicalities, I've covered them in my full review of the Sony X90L you can watch by clicking here.